It was just a few days after getting our Nintendo Entertainment System in 1987 that my dad went out and picked up Super Mario Bros. We had struggled to make any headway with Star Voyager, which is a game I've already talked about. So Super Mario Bros. Was something that my dad already knew in advance we would both be able to play and enjoy. This is because, at the time, Super Mario Bros. Really was the system seller for the NES. Just about everyone had played it, and everyone knew it was good. Most of the other kids that I knew who had Nintendos also had Super Mario Bros., though sometimes it was that split cartridge with Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt, and sometimes even a third game, Track and Field. But I just had the regular single-game cartridge. I'm not sure how useful a description of the game is, as I think most people out there have played Super Mario Bros., but the main point of the game is to rescue Princess Toadstool from the evil clutches of the Koopa King Bowser. You do this by running to the right. The core gameplay is really just that. You're trying to get from one end of the stage to the other, and when you do that, you win. But over the course of each stage, there are a lot of things to do. You collect coins, you collect power-ups, you stomp enemies, you find secrets. Despite the simplicity, it really feels like there is a lot to do, a lot to see, and the game is constantly introducing new gameplay elements, new aesthetic changes, or new enemies over the course of the game that really give it a feeling of progression as you play through. And that's really one of the aspects of the game that seemed the most surprising to me as a kid. I remember when making the move from Stage 1 to Stage 2 in the first world, there's even sort of a cutscene where Mario walks from the castle into the pipe, and suddenly he's in an underground lair. And I thought that that was just so amazing, because the second stage looked so much different from the first stage, and it really made me excited to see what would come next. The final stage of each level is always a Bowser's Castle, and those were always the most intimidating levels to me as a kid. The music actually kind of scared me when I was that young. I think it's interesting the way that the music seems to fit the aesthetic of the stage so well. The bricks, the lava, the fire, it all just seems to blend together in a very unique and perfect way. And when Bowser would start to shoot those fireballs as you get closer to him, that's when the tension would sort of really ramp up for me. And those levels were always pretty challenging and pretty exciting for me. At the end of each of those levels, you would find a mushroom retainer, is what they called these guys, the toads. So you'd find a mushroom retainer, and he'd tell you that, sorry, our princess is in another castle. So what I discovered later on was that the Bowsers that you're fighting are not actual Bowsers, they're faux Bowsers. And you can actually discover that it's one of his minions in disguise if you kill Bowser with fireballs. And in each level, it's a different minion. And when I figured that out as a kid, I thought I'd really discovered something kind of special. And that's a feeling that I got pretty often with Super Mario Bros. Just because of the number of secrets that there were in the game. And the secrets in Super Mario Bros. Were a pretty important part of the appeal to me as a kid. You know, finding that first one-up mushroom in stage 1-1, in that specific place where if you stand just to the left of that mountain in the background, you'll find it. Or finding those coin heavens where you have to climb a vine, and the warp zones, of course, can't forget the warp zones. And it was the sort of thing that you could compare knowledge with other peers who also played Super Mario Bros. You'd play at some other kid's house and be like, well, did you know about this one? Did you know about this one? And you would also learn new things as well. I mean, this was a time before the internet. So you had to rely on things like Nintendo Power or the Nintendo Power Line, which was an expensive helpline that you could call to get tips, or just other kids around the neighborhood. So, you know, that was a big part of the social aspect of, I think, gaming in general at the time. The graphics in Super Mario Bros. Are also, I think, pretty high quality, and they still hold their aesthetic appeal today in a way that I think a lot of other games prior to maybe the Nintendo Entertainment System in general haven't done. And, I mean, the Of course, they're simple and they're blocky, but there's something about them that is still very appealing. Even more appealing than the graphics, however, is the sound effects and the music. The music is some of the most memorable video game music of all time. It's classic. You can listen to some samples right here. The sound effects are something that I think most people don't really think about, but really enhance the experience. I mean, the sound of shooting a fireball, or breaking a brick, or stomping an enemy are all very satisfying. The most important aspect of the game, and I think that which sets it apart from all of its contemporaries, really is the controls. The controls in Super Mario Bros. Are about as perfect as you can get for a side-scrolling platformer. If you fail to make a particularly difficult or treacherous jump, you can pretty much know that it was your fault. It's not any problem with the control scheme. You could try to blame the controller, which, as kids I think we often did, but the controls are really about as solid as you can get. They're also very intuitive. Anyone who picks up the controller, sits down with the game, can pretty much figure it out without any guidance. The level design of Super Mario Bros. Is something else that I think really sets it apart from other games. I didn't really notice the level design very much until I contrasted it with Super Mario Bros. 2, and that's when I sort of realized how important it was. And I don't mean Super Mario Bros. 2, the Doki Doki Panic Western version. I mean the Japanese version, what's commonly called the Lost Levels. It didn't have the sort of slow progression of learning curve that the first game has. It just sort of comes straight out the gate with a lot of weird design choices. And what you can tell by contrasting these two games is that Super Mario Bros. 2 really isn't that fun, in my opinion. It has all the same elements. It has the sound effects, the music, the graphics, the controls, but just lacking in that one area of level design really sinks the whole ship. So it just goes to show you how failing in any one of these various areas can really affect the appeal of a game. And thankfully, Super Mario Bros. Really succeeds in just about every aspect. Here's one of my favorite levels right here. I don't really know why I like this level so much, but when I was a kid I would try to beat it as quickly as possible, which makes sense because you have less chance of getting hit by one of those flying fish if you just run really fast. Sort of introduced me to the concept of speed running, and also has a unique look. I should also mention my least favorite level in the game. It's the 7-4 Repeating Castle. Repeating Castle is like a labyrinth. You have to move through the two-dimensional corridors in a very specific way. Otherwise, the level just keeps repeating itself over and over. And this caused me a lot of frustration as a kid. A lot of thrown controllers, and a lot of tantrums were thrown as a result of 7-4. It's actually not the only repeating castle in the game. There's also one in 4-4, and also the final level in the game. But I think in the case of the last level, it makes sense that there be sort of this labyrinth feeling, just because it's the last level, and it should be more challenging. And it was never really as frustrating. And the same goes for the World 4 castle. That one is just a little bit simpler, so I'm not really sure that this was a great gameplay idea. Maybe it's just the 7-4 castle is just a little bit too much, but it always took me a few lives to get through, and I didn't really have the patience to do it methodically. One final aspect of the game that I think sets it apart and makes it pretty unique is the fantasy world that it takes place in. As far as I know, it doesn't track with any fantasy or mythology that I'm aware of, but there's a lot of weirdness there. Whether it's the sentient turtles and fungus, the power-ups, touching a flower to throw fireballs, or touching a mushroom to double in size. I mean, these are all pretty weird ideas, but they work, and it's pretty hard to imagine Super Mario Brothers without all that weirdness. And maybe a lot of that doesn't seem so weird today just because we've gotten used to it. But at the time that I was a kid, my parents sort of shook their head like, what the hell is this? Super Mario Brothers is a great game. It is a classic game. It's a game that I think is going to be remembered 30 years from now. Broke new ground, it set new trends, and it showed what games could be at that time. It was pretty much standard for everyone's video game collection. To this day, I still occasionally pick it up and will just make a run through the game. Sometimes I'll use the warp zones just to get straight to the end and beat it. It can be done in under 15 minutes easily. Sometimes, if I feel like I want to see everything, I'll just go through each stage one at a time. It's always fun. It's always going to be fun. If you haven't played Super Mario Brothers, then you need to go out and play it immediately.